From school debates over distance learning, in-person learning, to the vaccine Pfizer is getting more than almost $2 billion to mass produce here in the United States. The current state of this pandemic can be surmised in the headline that is getting the most attention right now. Coronavirus cases are certainly on the rise. ABC News medical contributor Dr. Darien Sutton joining me from New York. There are many angles, Dr. Sutton, with this virus that we can talk about. I do want to start with schools here in Minnesota. That is all the headlines. Since we know kids are least at risk to either get COVID-19 or not get as severely sick from it, are we any closer to knowing why that is?
Yeah, so that's up for debate and scientific research currently in all laboratories as to why this is happening. One of the prevailing ideas is that COVID-19 belongs to a family of viruses, as we know, called the coronaviruses, and it is thought that children often get these colds and these viruses, as we know. What we're also seeing is that younger people are getting the virus but just not showing any symptoms. So it also may be that children have high rates of infection, but simply we just not testing them because they're not symptomatic. So those are the main theories that are circulating right now in terms of why children are having the response to COVID-19 that we're seeing.
Dr. Sutton, every week we hear some good news on the vaccine front, and then it kind of dies down. 2 months ago, we heard Oxford University was closed, and that hasn't been making as big of headlines. Then in June, experts seem to think that we're about 1/3 of the way closer to having a vaccine. This week, we heard that there is a 2-dose vaccine coming out designed to prompt the immune system. How confident are you that we are that close to a vaccine, and when? That's the big question.
So I'm very hopeful that the vaccine will prove to be safe and effective, but I have to be realistic that normally these vaccines take years to develop. So the span of months causes a lot of concern with me as a physician and a scientist in terms of realizing whether or not we can substantiate the benefit of these vaccines. The top vaccines that are currently being produced and talked about in many different outlets include the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine, both of which are mRNA vaccines that help produce antibodies to fight this virus. But there are some things that we have to still wait for. The first is we have to look at these large population studies. Right now, our hopes are built on 45 people, studies based off of 45 people. And so if you can imagine, that's a very small group in science. So until we start to see the results of what happens when you give thousands of the vaccine to it, then we'll have a better idea. And also the understanding of what antibodies can do and if they last and if they're durable in the fight against the COVID-19 virus. So those are the two main questions. Number one, what will we see when these larger groups are tested? And then the second is if these antibodies will last. And so until I see that, then I'll have a more of an understanding and a realistic understanding of what's going to happen with these vaccines.
And we will have the ethical dilemma of who's going to be getting the vaccines first, and the most essential will be decided upon on who will be inoculated. That brings in the politics of that. And I know that your expertise obviously is medical, but how frustrating is it to see the politics come into this?
It's really frustrating to see different topics of prevention and fighting this virus become a political and a partisan issue. When we talk about wearing a mask, it's a very simple action that can help save the lives of others if you're exposing or possibly infected with COVID-19. As we know that 50% of people are infected with COVID-19 and probably don't know. And then when we talk about vaccinations and the idea of who will get them and when we'll get them. I think that there is a lot of hope, but we have to be realistic in terms of what is happening. And until I see a clear concerted effort from everyone, will I have more of an understanding and more of a hope that we can progress faster toward curing or eliminating this virus. But that needs to happen first. We need to get together, make clear, concise efforts and messages, and make sure that people understand what we're up against.
And then we hear that we keep being warned, there is going to be another round. Not if, but when. Where are you in that part of this puzzle?
So as an ER doctor and a scientist, we're very much still in phase 1, and I have to help people understand that because sometimes I think that rules and regulations can feel laxed because we feel like, oh, well, phase 1 must have ended, but that is not the case. We have numbers increasing in states like Texas, Arizona, and California, and we have to be cognizant of that and smartly defend ourselves against this virus. In terms of where we go next and what happens next in terms of another surge, what my fear and what many other physicians combine in that fear is is that during the flu season, we'll have a compounded effect of the flu season plus the COVID-19 season. And that is what we have to prepare ourselves for, and that's what I'm concerned about.
With that said, really quick, Dr. Sutton, and this will be my last question, what about an at-home test for it? Because I'm going to want to know, does my kid have the flu? Does he have the coronavirus? And we don't want people just rushing into emergency rooms.
Yeah, so we're starting to see a lot of these at-home tests be produced, but I have to encourage people to make sure that if you're using any specific test, to check on the FDA guidelines that specifically list the specificity and the sensitivity of these tests, which we use in science just to define accuracy. Because as we start to move into this market where people develop tests to give to people who are hopeful and scared, we're bound to see people take advantage. So I want to make sure that people understand, check your local guidelines, check the FDA approval list if you're going to use an at-home test, but I do think that in the future they will be helpful.
ABC News medical contributor Dr. Darien Sutton, thank you so much for your time, sir.